Lonely rancher buys abandoned house, then found a beautiful girl who won't leave. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The deed in Samuel Whitaker's saddlebag claimed the valley was empty. The clerk in the territorial office had spoken with a confident smile, assuring him no family remained, no walls stood upright, no hearth had known fire for years. This land, they promised, was his to claim, to shape into whatever new beginning he desired. But as Samuel reined in his horse at the ridge, he knew the papers were lying. A thin column of smoke curled lazily from the stone chimney of a modest cabin below. The garden that stretched out before it was no tangle of weeds but a careful design. Straight furrows of beans, onions, and squash, each row tended by deliberate hands. And there, in the yard, a young woman lifted a wet shirt from a basket and pinned it neatly to a clothesline that had no right to exist. She moved with the practiced ease of someone who belonged, humming softly as though the ground itself answered only to her. Samuel sat motionless in the saddle, his chest tightening with unease. The journey had taken him 3 days through steep passes and broken country, deeper into the wilderness than he had ever dared before. Every hoofbeat had carried him further from the scars of the war and the hollow noise of cities he no longer trusted. He had come west to disappear, to bury a past he could not forgive. And this valley, hidden between ridges of red stone and pine, was meant to be his sanctuary. Instead, it was already occupied. He guided his horse slowly down the slope, boots striking gravel when at last he dismounted. The air smelled of damp soil and wood smoke. The cabin was rough but sturdy, its windows curtained against the afternoon light, its porch swept clean. None of it looked abandoned. Everything whispered of family, of permanence. The woman noticed him when he was still 50 yards away. She did not startle or flee. Straightening, she wiped her hands on her apron, dark eyes steady and unafraid. There was no welcome in her face, only a quiet defiance that unsettled him more than open hostility would have. "Sir," she called across the yard, her voice clear as the mountain air, "you are standing on private land." Samuel paused, fingers brushing against the folded deed in his coat. With a slow breath, he drew it out, holding the papers high as though they could shield him from the certainty in her gaze. "On the contrary, miss," he answered evenly, "this property is mine, purchased legal and fair from the territorial office. I have the documents right here." The woman glanced at the parchment, then back at him. Her expression did not waver. "Those papers may carry weight in a town hall," she said, her tone calm, "but they mean little here. My family has worked this soil longer than such offices have existed." Her words struck him harder than a rifle shot. Samuel closed the distance carefully, each step of his boots crunching on the gravel path that led toward the cabin. The closer he came, the more details betrayed years of quiet devotion. A rocking chair on the porch, patched but sturdy. A worn Bible resting on the window ledge. The scent of herbs drifting from the garden beds. This was no squatter's camp. This was a home. "What is your name, miss?" Samuel asked, forcing steadiness into his voice. "Mary Ross," she replied without hesitation. "And you?" "Samuel Whitaker. I purchased this land through the Homestead Act, $3 in fees, notarized in the county seat." He held out the deed once more, as though the neat ink and official stamps might convince her. Mary's dark eyes flickered over the paper, then back to his face. "My father built this house with his own hands in 1847. My mother planted that garden. Both lie buried on the hill behind us, and I was born right inside those walls." Her voice did not waver. "Tell me, Mr. Whitaker, do you think a stamp on a page erases 23 years of life?" Samuel faltered. He had expected pleading, perhaps anger, but not this calm certainty, not this unshakable root of belonging. "I understand there may be confusion," he began cautiously. "The records state that the previous owner died without heirs. Perhaps we can discuss some arrangement." "There is no arrangement."
Mary turned back to the clothesline, pinning a blue dress that swayed gently in the mountain breeze. "This is my home. It has always been my home.
And I will die here if I must." The words pressed into Samuel's chest like a stone. She was not bluffing. Every line of her posture declared ownership, older and deeper than any clerk's record. His eyes wandered, searching for something to anchor the moment, and found it carved into the upright post that supported the line of drying clothes. Weathered letters, cut by hand but still legible. Jonathan Ross, 1847. The numbers seemed to sneer at his deed. If they were true, this land had been claimed before the territorial office had even been established. "Miss Ross," he said, voice low, "if what you say is true, then someone has wronged us both. I paid for this land in good faith." Mary faced him again, the sun catching the strands of her dark hair. "Then you have been lied to, Mr. Whitaker. The man who sold it had no right to sell. My family's blood is in this ground. That is a claim no paper can take away." For the first time since arriving in the valley, Samuel felt a tremor of doubt. Doubt not only about his purchase, but about the very purpose of his journey. He had come west to escape the noise of the world, yet it seemed he had ridden straight into its oldest argument: who truly owns the land beneath their feet? Far in the distance, the mountains stood silent, ancient witnesses to their dispute. And though Samuel did not yet know it, the valley was about to reveal secrets darker than any boundary line. To continue this adventure, please subscribe to our channel. It helps us keep creating. Samuel followed Mary as she led him up the slope behind the cabin. The path wound through patches of wild grass and scattered rocks until it crested at a small rise. There, set against the backdrop of the mountains, stood two simple wooden crosses. The boards were rough, weather-beaten, the names carved by hand but still legible: Jonathan Ross and Margaret Ross. Mary knelt to brush pine needles from the mounds. Her fingers lingered on the names as though they were the last thread holding her to her parents. "My father built this place when the valley was nothing but brush and stone," she said quietly. "He split every log of that cabin with his own hands. My mother planted the first seeds here. They worked the land until it became a home. And when they were taken from me, I laid them to rest here, where they can still watch over it." The breeze stirred her hair, carrying the faint fragrance of sage. Samuel stood a few steps back, hat in hand, feeling the weight of her words settle in the silence. The graves made the land feel consecrated, less a property, more a covenant. Mary rose slowly and pointed beyond the ridge, where the pass narrowed between jagged cliffs. "My brother Thomas was the one meant to inherit it. He was strong-willed, braver than most. But 2 years ago, he followed a band of riders through that pass." She paused, her gaze hardening. "He never came back." Samuel frowned. "Riders? What kind of men were they?" "Not settlers, not merchants," Mary answered. "They rode at night, carrying goods they did not want seen. Thomas thought they might be traders from Santa Fe or Prescott. He was curious, and curiosity can be dangerous here." Her voice grew tight. "He returned once, pale and restless, said little of what he saw. 3 days later, he rode north to check the boundary markers. His horse came back without him." The image lodged in Samuel's mind, a riderless horse drifting through the valley, reins dragging, saddle still fastened. He had seen enough in the war to know what such things meant. "You searched for him?" "Every canyon, every stream bed, for weeks." Mary's voice broke for the first time, though her eyes stayed dry. "I never found him, but I know this much: he did not just vanish. Someone made sure he never spoke of what he discovered." They stood in silence, the valley stretching wide and indifferent around them. Samuel felt the old ache in his chest stir, the familiar companion of loss.
He had buried comrades in hurried graves during the war, men who had names and families that the world would forget. Looking at the Ross markers, he realized Mary had carried a similar weight, but alone. When she finally turned to him, her expression was composed once more, though her voice carried a quiet defiance. "So you see, Mr. Whitaker, this land is not an empty claim to be bought and sold. It holds the bones of my parents. It holds the mystery of my brother. And it holds every ounce of sweat my family ever gave. No deed can replace that." Samuel swallowed, throat dry. He had thought he came west to escape other people's tragedies, to leave behind the dead. Yet standing here, he felt the valley pressing him into its story, demanding he choose whether to walk away or bear witness. The two of them walked back down toward the cabin, silence stretching between them. Samuel carried the weight of what he had seen on the hill. Graves did not lie, and the name carved into the clothesline post had not been written in any county record. Mary broke the silence first. "When my father died, the land should have gone to Thomas. That was the law. Sons inherit. But when Thomas disappeared, the office in town wasted no time. They wrote us off as if we had ceased to exist." Samuel studied her profile as she spoke. Steady, composed, but with a tightness around her mouth that betrayed years of swallowed anger. "You mean the land reverted to the territory?" "That's what they claimed," Mary said sharply. "That without a male heir, our claim had no standing. My mother's work in the garden, my father's sweat in every beam of that cabin, it counted for nothing. According to the clerk, I might as well have been invisible." The words stung Samuel in a way he hadn't expected. He thought of the war, of women who had kept farms alive while their husbands and sons marched away, only to be told afterward that their sacrifices had no place in the records. "And it was Harding who handled it?" Samuel asked, naming the man who had sold him the deed. Mary's lips curled bitterly. "Yes, Mr. Harding. He came sniffing around not long after Thomas vanished. Asked questions about who lived here, whether anyone remained to lay claim. I told him plainly this was my home. Days later, I hear from a passing peddler that Harding declared the property abandoned and up for sale. Imagine, Mr. Whitaker, standing in the yard your father built, while a stranger in a town office stamps a paper and erases your very existence." Samuel felt a hot surge rise in his chest. He pulled the folded deed from his coat and stared at the inked signatures, the neat lines of legal text. How confident he had felt leaving that office, believing he had secured a piece of peace for himself. How foolish it looked now in the face of Mary's truth. "I paid him in good faith," Samuel muttered, anger sharpening his voice. "Hard-earned money, saved from years I'd rather forget, and he sold me a lie." Mary fixed him with a steady gaze. "Then you know what I know, that Harding is not simply a clerk. He is part of something larger. He waited for Thomas to disappear, for my claim to vanish with him. He sold you stolen land because he believed no one would challenge it." Samuel's fists clenched. For the first time since arriving, the war-scarred stillness within him began to stir. He had come west to bury conflict, but here it was, waiting for him in the guise of a quiet valley. He folded the deed slowly, sliding it back into his coat. The parchment felt heavy now, not like a promise, but like evidence of betrayal. Mary's voice softened, though the steel beneath remained. "This place is not abandoned, Mr. Whitaker. It never was. And if Harding is bold enough to sell what does not belong to him, then we are both standing in a web spun much wider than this valley." Samuel met her eyes, and for the first time he felt not just the weight of her claim, but the pull of a deeper truth. He was no longer a bystander. Whatever Harding had set in motion, Samuel was already tangled in its snare. That evening, Samuel walked the edges of the property. The air had cooled, shadows stretching long across the valley floor. He told himself he was only familiarizing with the land, but the soldier in him, the part he tried so hard to bury, was cataloging every angle, every structure, every sign of purpose. The garden fence drew his attention first. It stood taller than necessary for keeping out deer or stray cattle, its boards thick, the posts braced deep. From a distance, it looked less like a boundary for crops and more like a barrier meant to slow men. His gaze shifted to the barn. Unlike most homesteads he had seen, this one was set not just for convenience, but for sight. From its loft windows, one could see the mountain pass clearly, long before riders reached the valley floor. The placement was not chance, it was strategy. Back at the cabin, he ran a hand over the shutters. They were reinforced from the inside, heavy enough to withstand more than weather. And the door? Oak planks cross-braced with iron. This house was no simple dwelling. It was a redoubt. Mary's voice startled him from behind.
"You see it, don't you?" Samuel turned. She stood with arms folded, expression unreadable. "This place was built to endure," Samuel admitted. "Your father, he wasn't just thinking of storms." Mary walked to the fence, fingers trailing along the wood. "My father knew the land gave life, but he also knew it could be taken. He listened to the Apache who lived near these ridges. They taught him to watch the passes, to think of escape before danger came. Most settlers laughed at them, said they were superstitious, but father understood. He built not just a home, but a way to survive." Samuel followed her gaze toward the mountains, where dusk painted the stone in shades of blood and shadow. He could almost see it, the riders Thomas had followed, slipping through the narrow trail, unseen by townsfolk who believed the valley to be empty. "And your brother?" Samuel asked quietly. Mary's jaw tightened. "Thomas took after father, always scouting, always testing the defenses. He knew every hollow tree, every hidden path. That's why I know he didn't just wander off."
"If he vanished, it's because someone wanted him gone." The words carried the weight of certainty, and Samuel felt the knot in his stomach tighten. He had once commanded men in the field, had walked ground where ambushes were sprung. He recognized the signs here: careful construction, precaution layered on precaution. The Ross family had not lived in peace. They had lived in readiness. Mary turned back to him, her face lit faintly by the rising moon. "You thought you were buying a quiet sanctuary, Mr. Whitaker, but this land has never been quiet. It remembers every boot that crossed it, every set of eyes that watched from the cliffs. My family did not build walls for nothing." Samuel met her gaze, and for the first time he admitted what his instincts had been whispering since he arrived. This valley was not just remote. It was contested ground, a place where secrets moved like shadows, and where survival demanded vigilance. Later that night, Mary set a small lamp on the cabin table. The yellow glow softened the rough-hewn walls, casting long shadows across the room. She moved with deliberate care, pulling something from a wooden chest near the hearth. When she placed it on the table, Samuel recognized the worn leather cover at once. A Bible, its edges darkened with years of use, the binding fragile but intact. "This belonged to Thomas," Mary said, sliding it toward him. "He carried it everywhere. Father gave it to him on his 16th birthday." Samuel touched the cover reverently. The leather was warm, as if the memory of its owner still clung to it. He opened to the first page and saw Thomas's name written in firm hand, dated years ago. But what caught his eye were the slips of paper pressed between the pages, carefully folded and marked. Mary leaned closer, her voice low. He started writing things down, names, places, dates. At first I thought it was idle curiosity, but as the notes grew, I realized he was tracking something dangerous. Samuel unfolded one of the slips. The handwriting was cramped but precise. June 14, riders through the northern pass, 5 men, 2 pack mules, not settlers. Talking of Prescott's shipment, names whispered, Kane, Harding. Samuel's breath slowed as he read more. Each note was a fragment, but together they painted a pattern. Repeated references to hidden cargo, secret meetings, men whose reputations were darker than the ink on the page. And Harding's name appeared more than once. "This," Samuel began, struggling to find the words, "this is not curiosity. This is testimony. Your brother was building a record." Mary nodded grimly. He knew. He saw what passed through this valley. He meant to expose it, I think, but before he could, he was gone. Samuel felt the chill settle into his bones. The war had taught him the cost of truth, how men disappeared when they knew too much, how power silenced inconvenient voices. He closed the Bible gently, as if the thin pages were fragile relics of a fallen soldier. Mary's gaze softened, though her voice remained steady. "Thomas believed that righteousness would outlast corruption. He once read me a verse from Isaiah and said it gave him courage." She recited softly, almost as though her brother were still in the room. "The fruit of righteousness will be peace. The effect of righteousness will be quietness and confidence forever." Samuel let the words linger. They carried a weight beyond parchment and ink, a promise that even in the valley of shadows, truth could carve a path to peace. Yet he also knew such peace came at a cost. He met Mary's eyes. "This Bible, these notes, they're dangerous. If Harding or the men he works with know you have them, they'll stop at nothing to take them." "I know." Mary reached across the table, her hand brushing the cover. "But they are also the only proof Thomas left behind. Proof that this valley is more than soil and timber. It's the stage for crimes that reach beyond these mountains." Samuel closed the Bible and slid it carefully back across the table. In that moment, he understood. The land he had bought was not just tangled in family grief, but in a struggle that could shake the territory itself. The fire in the hearth had burned low, casting the cabin in a restless glow. Samuel sat at the table, the Bible still heavy in his thoughts. He had come here for silence, for the chance to lay down the burdens of a soldier's life. Yet in the span of a single day, he had been confronted with graves, betrayal, and the echo of a brother's unfinished fight. He leaned back in the chair, eyes fixed on the rafters. "Maybe this isn't my place," he said at last, his voice rough. "I came west to escape battles, not walk into another one. Whatever Harding and his men are tangled in, it's more than I asked for." Mary stood near the window, her profile framed by moonlight. She did not move for a long moment, as if weighing whether his words deserved an answer. At last she turned, her gaze steady. "You think you can leave?" she asked quietly. "That you can ride out of this valley and find a peace untouched by the world's corruption?" She stepped closer, her voice gaining strength. "That's the same lie Harding sells, that land can be bought and sold like a loaf of bread, that lives can be erased with a stamp of ink. But this place," her hand swept toward the cabin walls, the garden beyond, "this place carries more than soil. It carries blood and memory." Samuel felt the words strike deeper than he expected. He had seen blood spilled across fields in Virginia, men whose names faded as quickly as their bodies were buried. He had tried to forget them, tried to bury himself in distance and wilderness. But Mary's words pulled him back, reminding him that forgetting was not the same as healing. "I buried too many men already," he murmured. "I don't want to bury anyone else." Mary's eyes softened, though her stance did not falter. "Neither do I. That's why I stand. Because if I don't, then Thomas died for nothing. My parents' work rots in the ground, and Harding wins." The silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of embers. Samuel rubbed his temples, torn between the life he thought he wanted and the one unfolding before him. He had believed peace could be purchased with solitude. Yet looking at Mary, he saw another kind of peace, earned through courage, guarded by sacrifice. He rose slowly, walking to the door. The valley stretched outside, silvered in moonlight, beautiful and merciless. His hand tightened on the frame. "If I stay," he said, "I put a target on my back, on yours." Mary's chin lifted. "The target has been here long before you arrived.
At least now I'm not alone in carrying it." Samuel looked at her then, really looked, at the strength beneath her weariness, at the fire that loss had not extinguished. Something within him shifted, a thread pulling taut.
He exhaled, long and heavy, then let the door close behind him. "Blood and memory," he repeated softly. "Maybe some things are worth standing for." The valley was quiet in the hours before dawn. Samuel had drifted into a light, restless sleep in the chair near the hearth, while Mary kept herself busy tidying the table, as though movement could hold back the heaviness pressing on them both. Then the sound came, faint at first, like the distant rumble of a storm. Samuel stirred, head lifting. His instincts sharpened, the soldier in him waking before his mind could catch up. He held up a hand, signaling silence. Mary froze, her eyes narrowing. Together they listened. The rhythm grew clearer, the hollow percussion of hooves striking stone, echoing down from the mountain pass. Not one horse, several. Moving with confidence, not the scattered pace of travelers, but the measured cadence of men who knew exactly where they were going. Samuel stood, crossing to the door. He cracked it open, the night air rushing cool against his face. The moonlight silvered the valley, and from the far ridge he caught the faint flicker of a torch. Another followed, then another. "They're coming," he whispered. Mary joined him, her face pale in the glow. "Not settlers. Settlers don't ride at night." The hoofbeats grew louder, steady, relentless. Samuel's chest tightened with recognition. He had heard such sounds in the war, columns of cavalry moving under cover of darkness, riding with purpose toward a target. This was no chance visit. "How many, do you think?" Mary asked, her voice low. "Hard to tell. At least 4, maybe more." Samuel shut the door quietly and turned to her. "Whoever they are, they're not here by accident." Mary nodded grimly. "They used the pass. That means they know this valley. And if Harding sold you this land, then they know you're here." Samuel ran a hand through his hair, every muscle in his body coiled. He had left the war behind, but now the war had found him again, hidden in the folds of this remote valley. The papers in his coat, the graves on the hill, the notes inside Thomas's Bible, all of it converged here, now, with the sound of hooves pounding closer. Mary's hand brushed his arm. Though her touch was steady, her eyes betrayed the weight of memory. When Thomas vanished, riders like these passed through first. "I should have known they'd come again." Samuel gripped the rifle leaning against the wall. It felt both foreign and familiar in his hands, an old companion he had sworn he would never need again. He met Mary's gaze, his voice firm despite the tension crackling in the air. "Whatever comes through that pass, we face it together." The hoofbeats thundered now, rolling through the valley like drums of war. The torchlight glowed brighter, weaving down the trail like a serpent of fire. Mary drew a sharp breath. "It begins." And in that instant, Samuel knew. The sanctuary he had sought was gone. The valley was no longer just a refuge or a memory. It was a battlefield waiting for dawn. The journey to explore the Wild West is still long. Subscribe to hear more true stories. If you're still watching, drop a 1 in the comments. The first light of dawn had not yet touched the valley when the riders arrived. Their hoofbeats rolled like thunder across the mountain pass, echoing through the stone walls until the sound became impossible to ignore. Samuel stood at the porch rail, rifle in hand, watching as dark shapes emerged from the trees. 7 men in all. They rode with the precision of soldiers, not wanderers. Their coats were dusty, but their weapons gleamed, rifles slung across saddles, revolvers low on their hips. These were not drifters looking for shelter, they came with intent. At their head rode a man whose presence pulled the air taut. Tall, broad-shouldered, his face marked by a scar that ran from temple to jaw. Even at a distance, the scar caught the dawn like a blade of silver. Silas Kane. Mary's whisper behind him confirmed it. Cain reined his horse to a stop near the garden fence, surveying the cabin with the cold patience of a predator. His voice carried across the yard, deep and deliberate. "Coleman said this place would be empty." He spat into the dirt. "So why is there smoke rising from the chimney?" The men around him shifted uneasily, scanning the yard. One dismounted, crouched to touch the ground, then rose with a nod. Fresh prints, boots not more than an hour old. Samuel felt Mary stiffen behind him. Her hand brushed his arm, a silent question. He gave the smallest shake of his head, urging her back inside. Cain's gaze swept the house. He gestured with a gloved hand. "Spread out. Check the barn, the fences. I want to know who's trespassing on our road." His men obeyed quickly, fanning out with military precision. 2 circled toward the barn loft, another toward the rear of the cabin. Samuel's soldier's eye noted their discipline, the practiced way they moved. These were not outlaws of chance. They were part of something organized, something larger. From inside, Mary whispered sharply, "They'll find us." "They already have," Samuel muttered. He pulled her gently back from the door, closing it to a narrow crack. Through the slit, he watched Cain dismount, boots crunching against gravel as he approached the porch. The scarred man walked with the assurance of one who had never been denied. "Come out," Cain called, his tone almost courteous, though it dripped with menace. "We can talk like civilized folk." Silence answered him. Cain's mouth twisted into a humorless smile. He nodded to one of his men. "If they won't talk, we'll smoke 'em out." Samuel's grip tightened on his rifle. The point of no return had come. Behind him, Mary clutched Thomas's Bible to her chest, her breath ragged. The cabin, the graves, the hidden notes, they all seemed to press inward, demanding a choice. Samuel had wanted only peace, but peace was gone. What remained was the fight that had finally arrived at his doorstep. The first blow rattled the shutters. Wood shuddered against iron braces as Cain's men tested the defenses. Samuel pushed Mary back from the windows, his voice low and steady. "Keep quiet. Every second we hold them off counts." Another crash followed, this time against the door. The oak beams groaned but held. Cain's voice carried through the yard, mocking, "You can hide for a while, but you can't stay buried forever. Open up, and maybe we'll let you breathe a little longer." Mary clutched the Bible close, her knuckles pale against the leather. She looked at Samuel, and for a moment he saw the shadow of fear in her eyes. But beneath it, something harder glinted, resolve. "They'll break through," she whispered. "The house was built strong, but not for this." Samuel nodded grimly. He had seen sieges before. No wall held forever. "Is there a way out?" Mary hesitated, then motioned him toward the back room. Beneath the rug lay a section of floor that bore faint marks of lifting. She knelt quickly, pulling the board aside to reveal a dark opening. A rush of cool, earthy air rose from below. "My father built a root cellar," she explained, "but he dug it deeper, with a passage toward the barn. He said a man should always have a second door." Samuel peered into the blackness. The narrow ladder descended into shadows. Beyond, a tunnel stretched low and rough-hewn. His pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the sudden clarity of what this meant. The Ross family had prepared for this moment long before. A heavy thud shook the house again. Splinters rained from the doorframe. Cain's men laughed, voices cruel and impatient. "Last chance," one shouted. "Come out walking, or we drag you out crawling." Samuel's jaw tightened. He slung his rifle across his back and gestured to Mary. "Go, I'll follow." She hesitated only long enough to press her hand against the table, the same place her brother's notes had lain hours before. Then she climbed down, the lamplight brushing her face before the darkness swallowed her. Samuel cast one last glance at the cabin, the hearth still glowing, the walls that had sheltered Mary's family for decades. The air smelled of pine smoke and dust. He closed the trapdoor softly behind him and descended into the earth. The tunnel pressed close, forcing him to crouch. Damp soil scraped his shoulders, the timber beams creaking faintly. Ahead, Mary's lantern cast trembling light on the packed dirt. Her voice reached him, tight but steady. "They'll tear the house apart, but they won't find us here. Not yet." Behind them, another crash split the silence. The door was giving way. Cain's laughter echoed above like the voice of doom. Samuel felt the ground tremble with each blow, but in the narrow dark of the tunnel he whispered a vow meant for no ears but his own. "This ends here, not with surrender." The tunnel air was damp, carrying the scent of earth and cedar roots. Samuel's boots sank into the packed soil as he crouched forward, following the dim flicker of Mary's lantern. Above them, muffled voices cut through the night. Boards creaked, boots stamped across the floor of the cabin. Then Cain's voice rang out, sharp and certain. "Search every inch. These old farmers loved their holes." A chill ran down Samuel's spine. He met Mary's eyes, and she knew what it meant. They had guessed the truth. Moments later came the sound of wood scraping against wood. Someone had found the trap door. Laughter followed, harsh and triumphant. "They're down there," a man crowed, "just like rabbits in a burrow." Mary's hand trembled around the lantern. Samuel placed his palm lightly over hers, steadying it. "Keep moving," he urged, voice low. "We'll reach the barn end." But then the smell came, acrid, unmistakable, smoke. From above, Cain's order cut through the floorboards. "Light it! If they won't crawl out, we'll roast 'em out." The crackle of kindling caught, spreading quickly. The tunnel walls began to breathe with a faint haze. Samuel's throat tightened as the first threads of smoke coiled downward, crawling through unseen cracks. Mary stopped, her shoulders rigid. In the trembling lamplight, Samuel saw her clutch the small Bible to her chest. Her lips moved silently at first, then formed the words aloud, her voice breaking but strong. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?" Her voice steadied, echoing softly in the narrow earth. Samuel felt the verse anchor him, cutting through the rising panic. He reached for her shoulder, firm. "Your brother carried that light. Now it's ours to keep." The smoke thickened, clawing at their lungs. Samuel wiped soot from his eyes, scanning the passage. The tunnel stretched forward, but each breath grew harder. He knew time was slipping. Behind them, a heavy thump sounded. The trap door slammed shut, sealing them in. Cain's laughter filtered down like a serpent's hiss. "Now we wait. Either they choke or they crawl out to beg." Mary's face glistened with sweat, her braid damp against her neck. Yet she held the Bible as though it were a shield, her knuckles white but unyielding. Samuel crouched close, whispering fiercely, "We can't go back. There has to be another way." Mary's eyes flickered, a spark igniting in their darkness. "There might be. Something Thomas told me, once." She raised the lantern, its light catching the faint outline of timber bracing along the wall. Her hand traced the beam as though searching for memory. He said he dug deeper, that there was a second path only he knew. The smoke swirled thicker, turning the tunnel into a suffocating tomb. Samuel tightened his grip on the rifle slung across his shoulder. There would be no turning back now. Either they found Thomas's secret or the fire above would claim them both. Mary's fingers moved urgently along the rough timbers until they found a joint that gave slightly beneath her touch. She pressed harder, and a faint line appeared in the wall where the soil had been carefully cut and replaced. "Here," she whispered, coughing against the smoke. "Thomas showed me once, said it was our last resort." Samuel lowered his shoulder against the earth and pushed. The packed soil gave way with a groan, releasing a cool draft of night air. Relief washed through him at the first breath of oxygen, sharp and clean compared to the choking haze behind them. "Go," he urged, motioning Mary forward.
The tunnel narrowed until they were forced onto their bellies, crawling inch by inch. Dirt scraped their faces, their elbows dug furrows into the loose soil. Behind them, the main passage glowed faintly with firelight, the smoke rolling like a living creature in pursuit. Mary's lantern sputtered and died, leaving only the faint shimmer of moonlight ahead. Samuel pressed forward, lungs burning, until Mary's voice rose from the dark. "I see it! Samuel! Daylight!" They clawed their way up the incline until at last they burst through a tangle of brush. Cool night air rushed over them, carrying the scent of sage and pine. When Samuel lifted his head, the sight struck him motionless. Before them lay a small clearing, solemn and still. 2 wooden crosses stood at its heart, their weathered beams tilting slightly under the weight of years. Beside them, a single stone marker gleamed pale in the moonlight. Mary staggered upright, her hand reaching instinctively toward the nearest cross. Her breath caught as she traced the carved letters, her voice breaking. "Father, Mother!" Samuel rose beside her, dust and soot streaking his face. The crosses cast long shadows across the earth, and for a moment the chaos behind them faded. This was holy ground, sanctified not by church walls, but by memory, sacrifice, and blood. Mary knelt in the grass, pressing the Bible against the soil at the foot of her parents' grave. Her shoulders shook, but when she lifted her head, her eyes burned with new fire. "We're not alone here," she whispered. "Their strength, it's still with us." Samuel's throat tightened. He had thought himself hardened to graves, to loss, but the sight of Mary kneeling among the markers stirred something deeper than grief. It was defiance. These crosses stood as testimony. The Ross family had rooted themselves into this valley with life, with labor, with faith. No outlaw could erase that. From the ridge beyond, voices carried faintly, Cain's men circling, searching. The valley was still a trap, and danger pressed close. Yet here, in this sacred clearing, Samuel felt a weight settle into place. He was no longer merely a stranger who had bought a piece of land. He was part of a struggle much older, and he would not turn away. Mary rose, brushing soil from her skirt, her jaw set. "Come," she said, "there's more my brother left for us to finish." Together they turned from the graves, carrying with them not only the threat of pursuit, but also the unshakable strength of the dead who watched over them. The night air clung cool against their skin as they crouched behind the shelter of the stone marker. Mary's hands moved quickly, slipping a small leather pouch from beneath her apron. Its edges were frayed, the stitching worn by years of being handled in secret. She pressed it into Samuel's hands. "Thomas left this with me before he vanished, said it was the only way to keep our family safe if something happened to him." Samuel untied the cord, his fingers stiff with soot and dirt. Inside lay several folded sheets, the paper yellowed but still firm. Ink scrawls filled each page, dense and deliberate. He spread one against his knee, lantern light flickering across the words. What he saw made his chest tighten. Names, dates, routes through the valley, tallies of stolen goods, and alongside them, payments to men in positions of authority. Mary pointed to one entry, her voice taut. "There, Judge Carver. He's the reason Marcus never came home. Thomas wrote that Carver protected the smugglers in exchange for his share. That's why Coleman declared our land abandoned, so Cain's men could use it freely." Samuel's jaw clenched as he traced the judge's name, inked in Thomas's strong hand. The betrayal struck hard. He had believed Harding's papers, trusted the promise of legal order. Now he saw the truth. He had walked willingly into a web of lies spun by men sworn to uphold justice. "They used me," Samuel muttered, anger rough in his throat. "Harding, Coleman, Carver, all of them. I wasn't a buyer, I was the bait." Mary's gaze held his, unwavering. "But now you know, and we have what Thomas died for."
She pressed her hand over the pages, her eyes burning. These words can bring them all down. Samuel exhaled slowly, his pulse hammering. For years he had run from causes, from battlefields, from the weight of choosing sides. Yet as he looked at Mary, so resolute, standing where her parents lay buried, he felt the pieces fall into place. "This valley isn't just soil," Mary said softly, echoing words she had spoken before. "It's blood and memory, and now it's truth." A shout cut through the night. From the ridge, Cain's men were calling, closing in on the clearing. Torchlight danced against the rocks, their shadows stretching like wolves across the grass. Samuel folded the pages carefully, sliding them back into the pouch and tucking it deep inside his coat. He rose, rifle firm in his grip. "Then the truth goes with us. If we fall here, these papers must reach the law." Mary stood beside him, the Bible in one hand, the resolve of her family in the other. "Then we stand together." The voices grew louder. The circle was tightening, but Samuel felt no retreat left in him, only the conviction that this night would end differently because of what they carried. The clearing erupted with shouts. From the eastern ridge, fresh riders appeared, lanterns swaying, rifles glinting in the pale light. Their formation was crisp, their banners marked with the seal of the territory. Marshals. Mary's breath caught. "They found us." But Silas Cain was quicker. His scarred face twisted with fury as he turned on his men. "Now or never, kill the witnesses before the law reaches us." His command split the night like a gunshot. The outlaws surged forward, weapons raised. Bullets tore bark from the trees, shattered stones near the graves. Samuel dragged Mary down behind the stone marker, dust spraying around them. The valley thundered with gunfire. From the ridge, the marshals advanced steadily, their rifles answering shot for shot. The odds had shifted, but the danger had never greater. Samuel knew Cain's men would rather die than hang. Mary pressed the Bible against her chest, her lips moving in prayer. Samuel's hand brushed the pouch inside his coat, the weight of Thomas's papers burning like a brand against his ribs. He realized then that it wasn't enough to survive. The truth had to be spoken, here and now, where every ear could hear it. He rose. Bullets whined past, splintering the stone, but Samuel stood tall, his voice rising above the chaos. "Silas Cain," he shouted, his words carrying through the smoke. "You are wanted for murder across 3 territories. And Judge Carver, your protector, his name is written in these pages. We have your crimes in ink and witness. Your time is over." The effect was immediate. Several of Cain's men faltered, glancing at each other, their grips loosening on their rifles. The marshals pressed forward harder, emboldened by Samuel's words. Cain's roar cut through the hesitation. "Lies! He's bluffing! Shoot him down!" But Samuel's voice rang again, steadier, unshakable. "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." The verse rolled across the battlefield like a bell tolling judgment. Mary's eyes glistened as she whispered the words with him, her faith fueling his courage. The marshals charged, their leader bellowing, "Drop your arms or be cut down where you stand." Gunfire crackled in reply, but the tide was turning. 2 of Cain's men flung down their weapons, backing away. Another broke for the trees. Cain himself lunged for his horse, fury and desperation etched into every movement. But before he could mount, a marshal's rifle barked. The scarred outlaw pitched forward into the dirt, the echo of the shot ringing long after his body stilled. Silence fell over the clearing, broken only by the groans of the captured and the labored breathing of the living. Samuel lowered his rifle, chest heaving, the words of John still lingering on his lips. Mary stood beside him, tears tracking through the soot on her face, but her voice was steady. "The truth is out," she said. Samuel looked down at the pouch inside his coat, then at the marshals advancing to secure the prisoners.
For the first time in years, he felt not hunted, not haunted, but free. If you like this video, please comment number 9. If you don't like it, please comment number 0. And please leave a comment and share your feelings. The smoke had thinned, drifting into the pale light of dawn. Birds stirred cautiously among the pines, as though testing whether it was safe to sing again. Samuel lowered his rifle at last, the weight of it slipping from his hands as exhaustion caught up with him. The battle was over. Across the clearing, the marshals moved with swift efficiency. Some bound the prisoners' wrists with iron cuffs. Others checked the bodies of the fallen. The scarred outlaw lay motionless in the dirt. The terror of his reign ended not by sword or vengeance, but by the law he had once mocked. Mary stood silent beside the graves, the Bible still pressed against her heart. Her dress was streaked with soot, her braid undone, yet there was a dignity in her bearing that no violence could tarnish. Samuel watched her for a moment, struck again by the strength she carried. Born of loss, yes, but also of faith that refused to die. The leader of the marshals approached, a grizzled man with gray steel in his hair and steady eyes. His badge caught the sunrise as he stalked before them. "I'm Marshal Davis," he said, voice deep and firm. "You two have had quite a night." Samuel reached inside his coat, pulling free the leather pouch Thomas had left behind.
His hand lingered on it, knowing the cost that had been paid to keep it safe. Then he placed it into Davis's hands. "Everything you need is here," Samuel said quietly. "Names, dates, routes, Judge Carver's dealings, Coleman's lies. Thomas Ross wrote it all down before they silenced him." Davis untied the cord, scanning the first page by the growing light. His brows furrowed, then rose as he read further. When at last he looked up, his expression carried both gravity and something like relief. "This is no ordinary ledger," he murmured. "It's a noose, enough to bring down Carver and every man tied to his racket." He closed the pouch reverently, as though it were scripture itself. "Your brother's sacrifice won't be forgotten, Miss Ross. The territory will see justice done." Mary's lips trembled, but her voice held steady. "That's all I've ever asked." Davis turned to her more fully. "And as for this land, Coleman's sales are already under investigation. With this evidence, it will be returned to rightful heirs. Your claim stands, Miss Ross, legally and now beyond dispute." The words seemed to unshackle something inside her.
Mary bowed her head, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She pressed her hand to the rough wood of her mother's cross, whispering a prayer of thanks that only the heavens could hear. Samuel stood close, his own chest heavy with a mixture of relief and lingering fury. For months he had sought a refuge, a place to bury the ghosts of war. Instead, he had stumbled into another battlefield, one hidden beneath layers of corruption. Yet here, with Mary at his side, he realized this fight had given him something the war never had: purpose. Davis studied him with sharp eyes. "You were no bystander, Whitaker. You stood tall when the truth needed a voice. Men like Cain thrive because folks stay silent. Tonight, you proved silence isn't the only way." Samuel met his gaze, then glanced toward Mary. "I only did what was right, what needed to be done." The marshal's nod carried the weight of acknowledgement. Sometimes that's all the Lord asks of us. Behind them, the valley stretched wide and quiet once more. But Samuel knew it was no longer the untouched sanctuary he had once imagined. It was scarred ground, consecrated by blood and faith, and in that consecration lay its true strength.
Mary lifted her eyes to his, a faint but resolute smile breaking through the fatigue. "We can start again," she said softly. Samuel breathed deep of the morning air. For the first time in years, the weight of his past felt lighter, not erased, but redeemed by the fight he had chosen to join. And as the marshals rode out with their prisoners, carrying Thomas's testimony toward the halls of justice, the valley stood witness to a promise that truth, once spoken, could never again be buried. 3 weeks later, the valley breathed again.
The scent of pine and tilled earth carried on the breeze, replacing the acrid smoke that had once smothered it. Grass grew green across the meadow, and in the garden rows Mary had planted fresh seeds, tiny shoots now pressed upward, stubborn in their reach for the sun. Samuel stood on the porch of the cabin, his hand resting against the rail. He had repaired the broken shutters, replaced the splintered boards, and straightened the hinges on the door. The house no longer felt like a ruin or a battleground. It felt lived in, restored by care, touched again by hope. Behind him, the floorboards creaked. Mary stepped out carrying 2 tin cups of coffee, steam curling into the cool morning air. She moved more easily now, her shoulders no longer bowed by constant vigilance. The weariness in her eyes had softened into something steadier, peace. She handed him a cup and sat beside him on the porch steps. For a while, they drank in silence, the birds providing the only song. "It feels different," Samuel said at last, his voice low. Mary looked out across the land. "It is different. For the first time in years, I don't wake fearing hoofbeats in the dark." She set her cup down, her gaze following the line of hills. "I think my parents would be glad. Their work, their prayers, it wasn't wasted." Samuel studied her profile, the strength etched there. "You've carried more than anyone should, Mary, yet you never let it break you." She gave a small smile. "Faith carried me, even when I thought I was alone." Her eyes turned to him, steady and unguarded. "But I'm not alone anymore." The words struck Samuel deeper than any bullet. He had come to this valley chasing silence, hoping to vanish from the world. Instead, he had found something far greater, a reason to stay, a hand to steady his own.
He set his cup aside, his voice rough. "I thought I wanted a place to disappear. But now—" He looked across the fields, then back at her. "Now I think this valley is where I'm meant to build." Mary reached for his hand, her fingers warm against his calloused palm. "Then let's build it together." The promise hung between them, quiet yet unshakable. From the hill behind the house, the wooden crosses still stood, weathered but upright, guardians over the land. And though grief lingered in their shadows, it no longer ruled. In its place was remembrance, a steadied anchor for the future they were daring to claim. Samuel glanced toward the horizon, where the sun spilled gold across the mountains. "A new day," he murmured. Mary nodded, her smile touched with tears. "And a new beginning." They sat there until the sun rose fully, lighting every ridge and hollow of the valley. The garden waited to be tended, the barn to be mended, the fences to be built stronger than before. There would be work, hard work, but Samuel welcomed it. Work meant purpose, and purpose meant life. When he rose, Mary rose with him, side by side. The valley stretched wide before them, no longer a place of entrapment or fear, but a home waiting to be made whole again. And as they walked toward the day's labor, the words Samuel had spoken that night still echoed within them, no longer a desperate cry, but a certainty. The truth had set them free. As the story of Samuel and Mary closes, we are reminded that the West was never just about gunfights and open ranges. It was about people holding on to faith, to family, and to the land that shaped them. Many of you watching may remember a time when life was simpler, when neighbors looked after one another, and when a person's word carried the weight of honor. This tale is more than fiction. It echoes the struggles and hopes of countless families who lived, fought, and prayed through those uncertain days. If this story stirred something in your heart, perhaps a memory of your own parents, or the strength of faith that carried you through hardship, then stay with us. Subscribe to our channel for more true Wild West stories that honor the past and remind us of timeless values. Your support keeps these stories alive for generations to come.